Okay guys, welcome back. Dr. H here with another newspapers revision video. Today I'm going to be talking about regulation and the news of the world phone hacking scandal case study. Let's get stuck in. With any regulation question, there is always the issue of how an industry is regulated and why the industry needs to be regulated. So if the medium was games or films, for example, regulation would take the form of age restriction and content descriptors. However, if the medium is newspapers, regulation takes on a very different role. The role of the regulator IPSO is to make sure that newspapers act in a fair manner and do not deliberately deceive their readers. The news regulator is IPSO, the Independent Press Standards Organisation, but it wasn't always so. Up until a few years ago, newspapers were regulated by the PCC, the Press Complaints Commission. However, in the light of the phone hacking scandal at the News of the World, which subsequently led to the paper being shut down, the PCC was disbanded and IPSO was established. Before we get into what happened at the News of the World phone hacking scandal, it's important to think about why we need regulation at all. There is a useful theory that helps us frame this debate. The theory is referred to as Livingston and Lunt's theory of regulation. At its most basic level, the theory outlines two different philosophies for regulation. One is restriction, and the other is empowerment. On the one hand, governments and regulators may wish to restrict what their populations have access to. This is sometimes seen in communist countries like China or North Korea, where they restrict news access, Google, and even Facebook. The theory being that it is the state's job to protect its citizens from harmful content. At the other end of the spectrum is the argument for empowerment and education. The philosophy here is that people are intelligent, critical consumers who should be allowed to make up their own minds, and as long as you give them enough information to do so, then they will be able to do just that. At the heart of this lies the issue of not strangling businesses by putting so many restrictions on that any content they produce is so sanitized to be meaningless or worthless to consumers, and they stop buying it. All regulatory systems across all media, across all countries, exist somewhere along this continuum between protection and empowerment. Protection from what, you might ask? This allows us to talk about another media theory, the effects theory. Now, whilst the effects theory is quite controversial and has been discredited by many sources, not least of which David Gauntlet's infamous 10 Things Wrong with the Effects Theory, link in the description, the effects theory is still widely used and favoured by examiners in the UK.
Beat up an inflated boba doll in novel ways. She pummeled it with a mallet, flung it in the air, kicked it repeatedly, and threw it down and beat it.
The effects theory operates a monkey see, monkey do belief that people will simply blindly copy the behaviours that they are shown. If somebody sees violent acts, it is more likely to make them violent. If somebody sees sexual acts, it is more likely to make them sexually active. These are the reasons that are often quoted for the need to regulate anything at all. However, where businesses and newspapers are concerned, regulation tends to focus much more clearly on issues of fairness and deception. One such issue arose in 2011 over the Murdoch-owned newspaper News of the World. It was a red-top tabloid newspaper that delighted audiences with stories of celebrity scandal, news about the royal family, and generally entertaining, sensationalist, or eye-catching stories. However, in 2011, it was revealed that the newspaper's reporters had been hacking the phones of prominent political figures, the royal family, and anyone deemed of interest.
I will find you, and I will kill you.
This included the phone of murdered schoolgirl Millie Dowler. Millie Dowler was a 13-year-old girl who went missing in 2002. It was revealed as part of the investigation that the News of the World had hacked her phone and accessed her voicemail. At the time, when Millie was just missing and had not been confirmed as murdered, the police assumed that it was Millie herself who had checked her voicemail. This information changed the way the police investigated the crime, delaying the conviction of Levi Belfield and possibly jeopardising any conviction at all. The scandal arose when it was established that Rebecca Brooks and Andy Coulson knew about the phone hacking and had allegedly given reporters permission to do it. There was even the suggestion that Rupert Murdoch himself may have known about this and approved it. And in 2012, Parliament concluded that Murdoch had exhibited willful blindness to the phone hacking and was not a fit and proper person to be running news corporations in the UK. However, the problems for the PCC were even larger. The PCC was run by the newspaper industry. Essentially, it regulated itself. The government decided that because of the phone hacking scandal, journalists should not be allowed to regulate themselves. An independent inquiry, called the Leveson Inquiry, was set up to recommend changes to the way in which newspapers were regulated. The report recommended a new independent body be set up, which would have a range of sanctions available to it enforceable by law. However, the then Prime Minister David Cameron said that they would not implement all of the recommendations of Lord Leveson's inquiry. As a result, the Independent Press Standards Organisation was set up to enforce the Newspaper Editors' Code of Practice. However, despite the I in IPSO, the organisation is still a self-regulatory body made up of members of the press industry. This means that the people who work for newspapers are still the people whose job it is to make sure newspapers are doing their jobs properly. In short, although the phone hacking scandal led to the closure of the News of the World and the imprisonment of one of its editors, Andy Coulson, it did not fundamentally change the self-regulatory practice of the newspaper industry.
I will find you. And I will kill you.